Tessa had always been curious. As a young alien scientist from the planet Zivora, she spent most of her days studying the many species in the galaxy. Some were peaceful, others dangerous. But none fascinated her like humans. Their resilience, their ability to adapt to the harshest environments, and most of all, Tessa walked to a nearby table and picked up a small device. "This will help me understand you better. It's not harmful," she said, her eyes scanning him for any sign of resistance. "But I will need to run some tests. You'll feel a little discomfort, but it will be over soon." Marcus's heart pounded. He didn't trust her. He had no idea what she was planning to do to him. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let her get away with whatever she had in mind. He clenched his fists, trying to think of a way to escape. But the cold, sterile room, the strange alien technology, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness made him feel small. Yet beneath the fear, there was something else. Determination. He wasn't going to just sit there and let this alien experiment on him. He had to find a way out. Tessa noticed the change in his posture, the tension in his body. She smiled to herself, intrigued by his strength. She had read about human defiance, but seeing it firsthand was something new. She could already tell that this human was different from others she had studied. "This will be the start of something important," Tessa said quietly, almost to herself. "You'll help me unlock the mysteries of your kind." But as she spoke, Marcus began to form a plan. He might be in her grasp now, but he wouldn't stay there for long. Tessa had never been so focused on one subject before. As a scientist from Zivora, she had spent years studying life across the galaxy. But now, there was only one thing on her mind: understanding humans. She had always been fascinated by their biology, their complex emotions, and their ability to survive in such harsh environments. But after bringing Marcus aboard her ship, she realized there was so much more to explore. Over the next few days, Tessa ran a series of tests on Marcus, collecting blood samples, studying his heart rate, his skin reactions, and his neural responses. She was determined to uncover the secrets hidden within the human body. But no matter how many tests she conducted, there were still so many questions that remained unanswered. Tessa found herself unable to put the human aside. She needed more data, more understanding. Marcus was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the endless experiments. Every time Tessa entered the room, he felt a sense of dread. She was polite, almost too calm, but there was no escaping the cold, clinical nature of her actions. She would ask him questions about his body, how he felt in certain situations, and then perform tests that made his skin crawl. It wasn't just the physical discomfort, it was the feeling of being studied, like an insect under a microscope. Yet, through all the tests, Marcus could feel something else. It wasn't just curiosity that drove Tessa, it was obsession. There was a hunger in her eyes whenever she looked at him, a burning desire to understand him in ways that went beyond science. It was clear she wasn't just looking for answers. She was searching for something more. But what? One evening, as the ship drifted through the stars, Marcus sat quietly in his holding cell. He was becoming more and more aware of the alien ship around him, its smooth walls, and the strange machines that hummed softly in the background. He had tried everything to escape, but every time he thought he had a plan, Tessa seemed to be one step ahead. She was smart, and her ship was equipped with technology far beyond anything humans had developed. Yet Marcus was beginning to realize something important. He wasn't just a specimen to her. He was more than that. Tessa had started asking him questions about his family, his home, his life. She wanted to know about his relationships, his emotions, his dreams. At first, he had been too scared to say much. But now he understood that she was trying to learn about something deeper, something intangible. She was obsessed with understanding the emotional side of human existence, the way they connected to others. Tessa spent hours observing Marcus, her eyes glued to the data screens as she recorded his responses to various stimuli. She'd show him images of other species, asking him how he felt when he saw them. She tested his heart rate when he spoke about his family, watching the small changes in his emotions with fascination. At first, Marcus had resisted answering her questions, but soon he began to realize that if he didn't cooperate, she would just keep pushing harder. And while he wasn't ready to trust her, he also knew that he had to play along if he was going to find a way out. If he could keep her focused on him, keep her thinking that she was getting closer to unlocking the secrets of humanity, maybe he could buy himself some time. But as the days passed, Marcus started to wonder if Tessa even realized how far gone she was in her obsession. Every time she spoke about her experiments, her eyes would light up with excitement. It was as if her entire being was consumed with the need to understand humans, to unravel the mysteries of their biology and emotions. It wasn't just scientific curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something almost personal. One day, Tessa sat down next to Marcus, her voice softer than usual. "Tell me about your home. What does it feel like to be human?" Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He had never considered his own humanity so closely before. It wasn't something people usually thought about. He had always just been him, a person living his life. But now, under her gaze, he felt like an object, something to be examined and understood. Still, he knew he had to respond. "I don't know," he said slowly. "It's just normal, I guess. We live our lives, try to survive, try to love. But it's not always easy." Tessa's eyes sparkled with interest. "What does love feel like to you? Is it different from how other species experience it?" Marcus was taken aback. No one had ever asked him such a question before. He thought about his family, his friends, the people he cared about. "It's complicated, but I think love makes us stronger. It gives us something to fight for. It helps us get through the bad times." Tessa leaned forward, her voice urgent. "And when you love someone, you would do anything for them." Marcus didn't answer right away. It felt strange to speak about such personal things to this alien, this creature who was studying him like a lab rat. But there was something in her expression that made him hesitate. There was an intensity in her eyes, a longing that he couldn't ignore. "Yes," he finally said, his voice firm. "We would do anything for the ones we love." Tessa's face softened for a moment, as if she was processing his words. "I see," she murmured. Then, just as quickly, her cold demeanor returned. "I must conduct more tests." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He didn't know what Tessa was after, but one thing was clear. She was obsessed with understanding human emotion, and she wasn't going to stop until she had all the answers. As she left the room, Marcus sat back in the chair, his mind racing. He couldn't just sit back and let her continue her experiments. He had to figure out a way to escape, and soon. He had to protect his humanity, not just for himself, but for everyone back on Earth. Tessa's obsession with understanding humans grew stronger with each passing day. Every test she ran on Marcus revealed something new, something fascinating. She had learned about their heartbeats, their emotions, and even the smallest changes in their brain activity. But there was still so much she didn't know. The deeper she dug into his biology, the more she realized how much humans held back from others. Marcus, though, seemed to have his limits. It wasn't just physical tests anymore. Now Tessa was experimenting with the mind. She wanted to see how Marcus reacted to extreme stress, to fear, to emotional pain. She had already seen him in moments of confusion and fear when he was first captured, but now she wanted to understand how much humans could endure. How much could Marcus bear before breaking? Each day, Tessa set up a new experiment. She would inject him with different compounds, monitor his reactions to simulated danger, and expose him to images and sounds meant to trigger fear or sadness. The technology aboard the ship was far more advanced than anything humans had, and Tessa was eager to use it to its fullest. "Prepare for the first test," Tessa said one morning, her voice calm and methodical as she entered the sterile white room where Marcus sat. He had learned to expect the daily tests by now, but the nervous feeling in his stomach was still there. There was always something unsettling about the cold, efficient way Tessa operated. She treated him like an object, something to be used for her experiment. And that thought filled him with anger and fear. "What's the test today?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Today, I will test your response to emotional stress," she replied. "We will see how your mind and body handle extreme feelings. I need to know how much a human can endure when faced with overwhelming fear or sorrow." The results could be groundbreaking. Marcus' heart skipped a beat. Emotional stress. The idea of someone deliberately trying to push him to his limits didn't sit well with him. He didn't trust Tessa, not even a little. But he had learned something important over the past few days. If he played along, if he didn't resist too much, maybe he could survive this. At least for now. Tessa pressed a button on the console, and a screen in front of Marcus flickered to life. Images of his family appeared on the screen: his mother, his father, and his younger sister. He could see them clearly, smiling in photographs, laughing together at holidays. His heart ached. "What is this?" he asked, feeling his stomach tighten. Tessa didn't answer immediately. She simply observed him, watching as his emotions flickered on the screen. "These are images of the people you love. How does it make you feel?" Marcus looked at the images of his family, the memories of home rushing back. He missed them so much. They were the reason he had been willing to fight through the fear when he was first taken. But now, faced with these images, the loneliness hit him harder than ever. The room seemed colder, and his chest tightened, as if the air itself was pressing down on him. "I miss them," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss them more than anything." Tessa's eyes studied him closely. She noted the changes in his heartbeat, the slight shift in his body temperature. She was measuring every response, every detail, but there was something else in her gaze, something more than just scientific curiosity. For the first time, Tessa felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Was it empathy? Was she starting to understand what Marcus felt? The test continued, though, despite the brief moment of understanding. The screen switched, and now images of dangerous creatures appeared. Alien animals, sharp-toothed and powerful, images designed to make Marcus feel fear. The creatures seemed to lunge toward him, their eyes glowing with hunger. Marcus's heart raced. His breathing quickened. His muscles tensed. The images triggered something deep inside him, something primal. He could feel his body reacting, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Tessa watched, her face unreadable. She could see the fear building in him, the stress creeping up as the images flashed by. "This is fear," she said softly, though her voice was filled with curiosity. "How does it feel to be hunted? To be prey?" "I don't want to be prey," Marcus gasped, his voice shaky. "These things, they're not real. They're not real." "Fear is real, Marcus," Tessa said, her voice still calm. "Even when the threat is not physical, it's real. It's in your mind. Your body reacts to the fear, even when the danger is not there." The test continued for what felt like hours, with images changing every few minutes. First, the creatures. Then, natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, fires, all meant to make Marcus feel even more fear. His heart raced, his muscles sore from tensing so much. It was getting harder to breathe. But he kept pushing forward. Tessa noted every little change in his vital signs. His pulse was higher than normal. His skin was flushed, a result of the anxiety flooding his system. She didn't speak, but her mind was working quickly. She had expected his response, but she didn't realize how much human fear could be amplified by emotional connections. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the screen went black, and the images stopped. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus collapsed back in the chair, his breathing shallow and fast. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his chest rose and fell rapidly as he tried to regain control. Tessa stood in front of him, watching with an expression that was difficult to read. "You are stronger than I expected," she said quietly. "Your ability to endure such stress is impressive." Marcus didn't respond right away. He was too drained, too overwhelmed by what had just happened. But in the back of his mind, he knew something important. Tessa wasn't as in control of the situation as she thought. She had been studying him, but he had learned about her too. He could use her curiosity, her obsession, to his advantage. And he would. Marcus wasn't about to let this alien get the better of him. Marcus had always thought he knew what fear felt like. But after the tests, after the images and sounds that had nearly broken him, he realized how little he understood about his own emotions. Tessa's experiments pushed him further than he thought possible. He had never imagined that something like this could happen to him. Being trapped in a cold alien ship, treated like a specimen, pushed to his limits. Yet there was something else he felt, something that started growing inside him with every passing day. It was a sense of powerlessness mixed with determination. He couldn't control the tests Tessa ran on him. He couldn't stop her from studying his biology or examining his emotions. But he could control how he responded. He could still hold on to his humanity, even in the face of all this. The thought kept him going. The idea that, no matter what Tessa did, she couldn't take away who he was. Tessa, on the other hand, was more focused than ever. She had made incredible discoveries about human biology. She had watched Marcus' body react to fear, stress, and even joy. But there was one thing she hadn't figured out: the emotional bond humans shared with each other. She knew that love was a powerful force for humans, but she had no idea how to fully understand it. She had asked Marcus about it, but his answers were vague, wrapped in emotion and mystery. Tessa wasn't satisfied with just his words. She wanted to see it for herself. She wanted to understand this bond deeply, in a way that went beyond what she had seen in other species. That's when she came up with an idea. She would try something different, something that would give her more insight into the way humans loved and cared for one another. She had access to Marcus' memories, his past, through the neural interfaces she had installed during their first few tests. She could access his memories and emotions, and now she intended to explore them. But Marcus didn't know that. It was early in the morning when Tessa entered Marcus' room again. He was sitting on the cold metal chair, his eyes downcast, lost in thought. His mind was still on the events of the previous tests, the images of danger, the feelings of fear that still lingered. "Good morning, Marcus," Tessa said, her voice as calm as ever. "I have a new test for you today." Marcus looked up at her, his expression wary. "What is it this time?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Tessa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to the console, her fingers moving across the buttons with ease. "This test will focus on the emotional connection you have with your loved ones," she said at last. "I want to see how your brain and body respond when you think about them." Marcus' heart skipped a beat. He had learned to expect anything from Tessa, but this felt different. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rising slightly with concern. Tessa didn't look at him as she activated the equipment. "I'll be accessing your memories," she said. "I want to understand the emotional bonds you share. Your mind will be connected to the system, and I will guide you through the process. You will relive moments from your past, moments with your family, friends. I want to see how deep your attachment goes." Marcus' stomach churned. The thought of reliving those memories was almost too much to bear. His family, his home, he missed them so much. It was already hard enough to be away from them. But now, Tessa wanted him to relive those moments, to feel the loss all over again. "What will happen to me?" he asked, his voice shaking now. "What are you doing to my mind?" Tessa finally turned to look at him. There was something different in her expression, something that resembled empathy, but it was still hard to read. "Don't worry, Marcus," she said, her tone softer than usual. "This isn't painful. It's just a test. I need to understand this connection that you humans feel. I need to see it for myself." Marcus hesitated. He didn't trust her. How could he? She had already pushed him so far. And now she wanted to invade his most private memories. It felt like a violation. But he had no choice. He couldn't resist. He had to cooperate if he wanted to survive. "Fine," he said, his voice low and reluctant. "Let's get it over with." Tessa smiled slightly and pressed a button. Instantly, Marcus felt a strange sensation, a cool, tingling feeling in his brain. It wasn't painful, but it was unsettling. His vision blurred for a moment. And then, suddenly, he was back in his childhood home. The smell of his mother's cooking filled the air. He could hear his father's voice in the other room, laughing as he played with his sister. The warmth of the sunlight coming through the windows made everything feel so real. It was like he was there again, like he had never left. Tessa's voice echoed in his mind, soft and distant. "Focus, Marcus. Tell me what you feel." Marcus didn't know what to say. He was overwhelmed by the flood of memories. He could see his younger self, running through the backyard with his sister. He could hear his parents' voices, their laughter, the simple joy of a family united. It all felt so real, so raw. "I feel," Marcus started, but his voice faltered. "I feel happy, safe, loved." "Good," Tessa said, her voice echoing in his mind. "Now focus on the feelings you have for them. What does it mean to love them?" Marcus swallowed hard. "It means everything," he whispered. "It means I would do anything for them. I would fight for them. I would protect them, no matter what." Tessa remained silent, her eyes scanning the data on the screen. She watched his responses closely, noting every change in his heart rate, his breathing, his emotional state. For the first time, she saw the depth of the bond humans shared with one another. It was unlike anything she had experienced with other species. It was powerful. It was real. But there was something else she noticed too. As Marcus relived the memories, there was a shift in him. A determination. A strength that he had never shown before. It was as if the memories were fueling something in him. Something more than just emotion. Tessa couldn't help but wonder. What was Marcus capable of? And more importantly, what was he planning? As the days passed, Marcus found himself caught between his desire to fight back and the crushing reality of his situation. Tessa's experiments grew more invasive with each passing day. Her obsession with understanding human emotions and biology had only intensified. But in the midst of all this, Marcus had begun to notice something else. Tessa was starting to become predictable. Her routine was the same. She would enter his cell, explain the test, and then run it. Each time, he felt his mind and body pushed to their limits, but with each test, he learned more about her. And that gave him an idea. The idea of escape had been in his mind from the very beginning. But until now, it had seemed impossible. The alien ship was too advanced. The technology was beyond anything humans had, and Tessa was always one step ahead. However, there was a weakness in her approach, her obsession with him. Marcus knew she was fascinated by human emotions, by the strength of the connections humans formed with each other. And because of that, she had made a critical mistake. She had started to rely too heavily on his responses, on his emotional reactions. She was so focused on studying him that she failed to see what he was doing in return. Studying her, he had begun to notice small things about Tessa's behavior. The way she spoke, the way she operated the ship's technology, the way she relied on specific routines. She had routines, patterns, and Marcus was learning them. Every test she ran, every memory she pulled from him, it gave him a better understanding of how to manipulate her methods. But more importantly, he had learned something critical about the ship. It had several security systems, all designed to keep him contained. But there was one flaw. Tessa didn't think he would try to escape. She was so focused on her research, she didn't believe he was capable of outsmarting her. That was where Marcus had the advantage. He wasn't just a human trapped in a cage. He was a human who had lived a life, who had been part of a world full of dangers, challenges, and survival. He had learned how to fight for what mattered. And right now, that was his freedom. The plan was simple, but risky. Marcus needed to buy himself some time. and he needed to find a way to get Tessa's attention without making her suspicious. He couldn't just make a break for it. He needed to outthink her, not outfight her. The first step was gaining her trust, at least for a little while longer. He had to make her believe he was still cooperating. It was clear to him now that Tessa was emotionally invested in him. She believed that by pushing him to his limits, she could unlock the secrets of humanity. The key to his escape was to make her believe he was still an open book, someone she could continue studying. That meant the next test had to be something that would make her think she was getting closer to understanding him. Something she would find so fascinating, she wouldn't notice the cracks in her control. Tessa entered his room as usual, her eyes sharp and focused. But today, Marcus was ready. He had a plan, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him from carrying it out. "Marcus," Tessa said, her voice flat, "today's test is a simple one. I want to see how your brain reacts to a simulated emotional experience. It will be different from anything we've done before. It should provide valuable data." Marcus nodded, his face a mask of calm. "All right. What do you need me to do?" Tessa gestured toward the console. "Please, sit in the chair. We'll begin shortly." As he moved to the chair, Marcus' mind was racing. This was it. He had to play his part perfectly, act as though he was fully compliant, and keep Tessa focused on her experiment. She had always been so interested in the way humans felt, the way their emotions shaped their decisions. He was going to use that to his advantage. Tessa began the simulation. A screen in front of Marcus flickered to life, showing a peaceful image, his family's home, the house he grew up in. He could hear the sounds of laughter, smell the familiar scent of his mother's cooking. It was exactly like the memory he had experienced before, the one that made him feel warmth and love. But this time, the memory shifted. The scene changed, and suddenly, he was watching as a figure, his father, was taken away, his mother crying in the background. The peacefulness was replaced with pain. The joy was gone, replaced with sorrow. The memory shifted again, and now he saw his younger sister, alone in the house, searching for him, calling his name, but there was no answer. The pain hit Marcus like a wave. His chest tightened, his eyes burned with tears, and he could feel his heart race as the emotions overwhelmed him. The memory of loss was too much. His body reacted instantly, his pulse speeding up as his emotions surged. Tessa watched, taking notes, her expression unreadable. She was focused, scanning his vitals, tracking every fluctuation. "What do you feel, Marcus?" she asked, her voice clinical. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "I feel lost, alone, like I'd lost something I can never get back." Tessa's eyes gleamed with excitement. "This is fascinating," she said, speaking almost to herself. "Your emotional depth is unlike anything I've seen before. The way your body reacts, the connection to this memory, it's remarkable." As she spoke, Marcus felt his heart racing faster. He knew what he had to do. He had to make her believe he was still fully immersed in the emotion, fully under her control. He let the sadness wash over him, playing the part perfectly. But all the while, his mind was working. He could feel the ship's energy shifting. He could hear the faint hum of the control systems. This was his moment. "Can you tell me more about your family?" Tessa asked, her voice full of interest. "How did they shape you?" Marcus looked up at her, his eyes still filled with tears. "They taught me the value of love," he whispered. "The value of protecting those you care about." Tessa nodded, unaware that in that moment, Marcus was planning his next move. The emotional bond she wanted so badly to understand was the very thing that would allow him to escape. Marcus had spent days pretending to be overwhelmed by his emotions. Every time Tessa asked him to relive a painful memory, he played the part, letting the sadness, fear, and loss flood through him. It wasn't easy. It was difficult to keep his mind in control while pretending to be broken by the past. But he knew it was necessary. His plan was slowly coming together. Tessa had become more and more focused on him. She was completely absorbed in her quest to understand human emotions. She had no idea that Marcus was using her curiosity against her. Every time he pretended to be weak, she got closer to trusting him. And every time she trusted him, he was one step closer to finding a way out. The ship was full of advanced technology, and Marcus knew how to use it. Tessa had already shown him the basics of the system, thinking he would be too overwhelmed to understand it. But that was a mistake. She had underestimated him. He had learned the system's layout, the security protocols, and the hidden weak spots. And now, it was time to act. Today was different. For the first time, Marcus felt ready to make his move. He couldn't wait any longer. The test Tessa had set up for him was simple enough. She wanted to observe how he reacted to the idea of losing his family. To her, it was just another way to collect data. To him, it was his final chance to escape. When Tessa entered his room that morning, Marcus was ready. His face was calm, but inside, his heart was pounding with anticipation. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, her voice cold and professional. "Today, I want to run another emotional test. This one is about the bond you feel with your family. I'll be showing you a simulated version of their disappearance. I need to see how your brain and body react to the idea of losing them forever." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded. "All right, let's do it." Tessa studied him for a moment, looking for any signs of resistance. She didn't see any. Satisfied, she turned to the console and activated the simulation. The screen in front of Marcus flickered, and his family's faces appeared once again. But this time, the image was different. It wasn't a memory. It was a simulated version of the worst-case scenario. His parents were lying in the street, motionless. His sister was standing next to them, tears streaming down her face. The pain, the loss, it hit Marcus hard. For a moment, he almost lost himself in the simulation. His body tensed, and his heart pounded in his chest. The familiar feelings of grief and helplessness threatened to overwhelm him. But he forced himself to focus, pushing those emotions aside. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Tessa's voice came through the speakers, smooth and detached. "How do you feel, Marcus? Is this loss the same as the real thing?" Marcus swallowed hard. His mind was racing, but he kept his voice steady. "It's worse," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I can't do anything about it. I can't save them. I can't protect them. And that hurts more than anything." Tessa nodded, taking notes. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The emotional intensity is overwhelming. Your connection to these people is clearly strong. But what I don't understand is how you can still function. How can you survive something like this? What makes you keep going?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions under control. This was the perfect time to plant the seed of doubt in her mind. He needed to make her think he was at his breaking point, that he was ready to give up. If she believed that, she would let her guard down. "Because I have no choice," he said finally, his voice low and quiet. "Because even if I lose everything, I have to keep going. I can't let them die for nothing. They wouldn't want me to give up, and neither will I." Tessa watched him closely. Her gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly returned to her scientific detachment. "Interesting. Your survival instinct is strong, but your emotional response is overwhelming. I've never seen anything like it." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He was starting to see the cracks in Tessa's control. She had become too focused on her data, too absorbed in her research to truly understand him. She didn't know that every word he spoke, every reaction he had, was carefully planned. She was starting to underestimate him. And that was exactly what he needed. After a few more minutes of observation, Tessa ended the simulation. "That will be enough for today," she said, her voice still clinical. "You can rest now." Marcus nodded, but he didn't move. He had to stay alert. As Tessa turned to leave, he felt a surge of adrenaline. It was time. "Wait," Marcus called, his voice suddenly sharp. "I want to try something." Tessa paused, looking back at him. "What do you mean?" "I want to test my limits," Marcus said. "I've been through a lot, but I think I can handle more. I can show you more about human resilience. Maybe it'll help your research." Tessa's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "Are you sure? This is a dangerous path, Marcus. I don't want to push you too far." "I'm sure," he replied, his voice steady. "I want to prove something to you." Tessa seemed to hesitate, but after a moment she nodded. "Very well. I'll run another test." As she began to set up the equipment again, Marcus's heart raced with anticipation. This was it, his chance. While she was focused on the new test, he would make his move. He had studied the ship's systems enough to know where the control center was. If he could just make it there, he could override the security protocols. And once he did that, he would be free. He wasn't going to let Tessa control him anymore. He had been playing her game long enough. It was time to turn the tables. The moment Tessa turned her back to set up the next test, Marcus knew it was now or never. His heart was pounding in his chest, his mind racing. He had been preparing for this moment for days, and everything had led up to this one chance. He had to escape. He couldn't stay here any longer, trapped like an experiment, his life controlled by her. It was time to take control back. He kept his movements slow and steady, trying to avoid drawing her attention. As she fiddled with the console, Marcus slid his hands under the table, searching for the small button hidden beneath the surface. It was one of the hidden emergency release mechanisms he had discovered during his time on the ship. It wouldn't open the whole ship, but it would give him access to the lower levels, where the security systems were weaker. His fingers found the button, and he pressed it quietly, holding his breath. The ship's lights flickered for a moment, and a soft hum filled the room. Tessa didn't seem to notice. She was too focused on her work, too wrapped up in her data. Marcus carefully got to his feet, staying low, watching Tessa's back. She was still focused on the screen, typing away, her eyes scanning the results of his emotional test. He knew she would only be distracted for a few more minutes before she checked on him again. He couldn't afford to waste time. His feet moved silently across the floor, and he quickly made his way to the door. The exit was only a few steps away, but it felt like miles. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, could feel the sweat forming on his forehead. But he pushed the fear down. He had to focus. He reached the door and quietly pressed a series of buttons on the panel. The door opened with a soft hiss, and he slipped through, careful not to make any noise. Once outside the room, Marcus quickly surveyed his surroundings. The hall was empty, silent. He had memorized the ship's layout from the countless hours Tessa had spent showing him how everything worked. The control center was nearby, but the security systems were tighter the closer he got. He had to move fast. Marcus hurried down the hall, moving as quietly as possible. The metallic walls of the ship felt cold against his skin, and the low hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the silence. He passed several doors, most of them locked, but he didn't stop. He knew where he needed to go. The ship's control center was ahead. He could feel his heart racing again, but this time, he didn't let the fear take hold. He had to be calm. He had to be smart. Tessa had underestimated him, and now he was going to use that to his advantage. When he reached the control room door, Marcus hesitated. He didn't know how much time he had before Tessa would realize something was wrong. She was still in the testing room, but it wouldn't be long before she started checking on him. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room was dark, but the control panel lit up as soon as he entered. Rows of buttons, switches, and screens filled the room, but Marcus didn't waste time admiring the technology. He knew what he had to do. He quickly moved to the main console, scanning the buttons for the one he needed. The security system was complex, but not impossible. He had learned enough from Tessa's instructions to know which buttons would override the security protocols. He had just one shot at this. Marcus pressed the buttons in quick succession, holding his breath as the system's locks began to release. The soft clicks of the security systems unlocking were the only sound in the room. He smiled to himself, but the feeling didn't last long. He had to act quickly. The countdown had started, and Tessa would be coming soon. He turned to the nearest panel, where a series of doors appeared on the screen. He found the one that led to the lower levels, where the escape pods were kept. With one last press of the button, the door slid open, revealing the escape passage. But just as Marcus moved to leave, the door to the control room slammed open. Tessa stepped inside, her eyes wide with shock. "Marcus," she shouted, her voice rising in disbelief. "What are you doing?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He had known this moment would come. He had known she wouldn't let him leave without a fight, but there was no turning back now. "I'm leaving, Tessa," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This is over." Tessa's face twisted in anger and confusion. "You can't leave. You're not ready. You're not finished. I'm done," Marcus interrupted. "You've used me long enough. I won't be your experiment anymore." Tessa took a step forward, her hand reaching out as if to stop him, but Marcus didn't flinch. He turned, walking toward the escape route. "Goodbye, Tessa," he said quietly, his voice full of resolve. Tessa stood frozen, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a sudden movement, she reached for a control panel, but it was too late. Marcus was already disappearing into the lower levels, the door sliding shut behind him. The hum of the ship's engines was all that remained, a cold, mechanical sound that seemed to echo in the empty corridor. Marcus didn't look back. He had fought too hard to get here, and now he was free.